Let's bow together. Holy Father,
We're glad you're here this evening. We're talking about one of my favorite subjects, the rocks, but not about all of the rocks. We're talking about the sedimentary rocks this evening. We talked a little bit about that last night, compared it with what we see on Mars, amazingly, and seeing layered rock, horizontal layers. They acknowledge, well, yeah, that's laid down by water, but you see that kind of thing on Earth where there's much more water. They have a great deal of resistance, though they will acknowledge that sedimentary rock was laid down by water. It has billions and billions of dead things in it. Now, what would lay down about an average of 1.5 miles of sedimentary rock that covers the continents with billions and billions of dead things in it? What would possibly explain that? And I think that's an obvious answer. A flood, a universal flood, certainly would. It covers the continents, and the average is about 1.5 miles covering all of the continents. Now, the evolutionist says that this was accomplished by the slow, gradual buildup over millions of years. And if you were here last night, we talked about that, and looking at the rocks, that's not the best explanation. In fact, it's an impossible explanation for the stuff that we see in the rocks. We say, no, this was a rapid, catastrophic, high-energy, year-long series of catastrophes that we see described in Scripture. But here, because of what we see in the rocks, we conclude this is a better explanation. But here are the two competing ideas that we want to look at this evening. The evolutionary model is generally represented like this. Anybody ever seen this before? All of the earth science books, biology textbooks, geology textbooks, over and over you see this representation. And it's supposed to represent the slow, gradual buildup over millions of years of evolution, beginning with the simple animals at the bottom and the more complex at the top. The problem is you don't find it anywhere except in the textbooks, at least in this complete form. Now, I think there is at least a very general order, somewhat similar to this, that we'll explain as we proceed, but certainly not the complete detailed picture that we see here. Leet and Judson wrote the textbook Physical Geology and make a very interesting statement about this column, because we cannot find sedimentary rocks representing all of Earth time neatly in one convenient area, which is what this represents. We can't find that. We must piece together the rock sequence from locality to locality. So some from Texas and some from Washington, some from China, and it's stacked together. This process of tying one rock sequence in one place to another sequence in another is known as correlation. So it's co-related, stacked together. But how do you do that? Well, if you're an evolutionist, of course, the simple things go on the bottom and more complex as you work upward, but it is not what you find or where you find it, but it is how you stack it. It is not an absolute concrete pardon the pun, finding in the rock record. As the Encyclopedia Britannica says, the end product of correlation is a mental abstraction called the geologic column. Now, you don't normally learn that as you're looking in the textbooks. This is represented as what you find when you dig down in the earth, which is simply not true. The representation is actually based, certainly in detail, on circular logic. Here, R.H. Rastel of Cambridge University says, it cannot be denied that geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms has been determined by a study of the remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the organisms they contain. Or we could illustrate it this way. You got a primitive fossil. Okay. How do you know this is a, quote, primitive fossil? Well, it's found in an old rock. All right, I can understand that. But how do you know that this is an old rock? Well, it's got a primitive fossil in it, you see. And round you go, which is not proof of anything. It is the illustration of the assumption of evolution, but not what you find when you look at the rocks. Very interesting statement was made by David Rapp, who's curator of the Field Museum of Natural History, the largest fossil museum in the United States, regarding the supposed evolutionary progressions that are supposed to be documented. He says, in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. He didn't find them, but he predicted they would be found. He says, in general, these have not been found. And by the way, this is a devout evolutionist, one of the leading, best-known evolutionists in the world. Yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. And this is what he's talking about in terms of the complex order, the details that we see here. They come from circular logic and not because of what you find in the rocks. One obvious skewed aspect of this representation is that we're looking mostly at the big animals that would leave more lasting, more dramatic impression, the animals with backbones. And that's virtually missing, relatively speaking, missing from the fossil record. And so that presents a very skewed picture. What we find mostly in the fossil record are marine invertebrates. Well, why don't you put that in the representation that's called the geologic column? Well, it might look like something they don't want it to look like a flood. Of the 95% that we're talking about, 5% left, 4.5 is plants and algae. The vertebrates, which is what you see in the representation, is actually less than 1/100th of 1%. But that's what they put in the column as a representation of what's there. Now that's misrepresenting the evidence, I think, to keep it from looking like what I believe it is, a flood deposit. It's interesting to notice that Nicholas Steno, who is presented as a hero to geologists today, called the father of modern stratigraphy, believed exactly what I did when he wrote the rules for interpreting the strata some 300 years ago. In the textbook Evolution of the Earth by Patton, we read Steno's axioms. He had 12 of them, and if you're going to study stratigraphy and you don't know those axioms, you're not going to pass. This is the way you do stratigraphy. His axioms provide the ultimate basis of practically all interpretation of Earth history, so their importance can hardly be overemphasized. This is fundamental. I did see one of the original editions of his book when I was doing work at Cambridge there in England, And in the museum there, this book was opened to the flap page, dedicated to the proof of the Noachian deluge, which tells you where he was coming from. This book on geology was written with the concept of the flood in mind, and that's what his book on geology was about. He thought it was done by the flood. A lot of people will say, well, if you got a flood, it just mixes everything up and it would just be a mess and wouldn't be any order at all. Not at all. If you understand the way water works and the way the flood would have worked, he understood it well enough to write the rules 300 years ago that we're still using today. So you can't say it doesn't work. It worked very well. In fact, we know, it has been acknowledged more recently in geology that he did believe in the flood all of his life. Based on that work that was done by Steno, Whitcomb and Morris published in 1961 the book Genesis Flood, which became the impetus, the beginning of the modern creation movement in the United States. Basically saying it is explained best by a catastrophic flood. John C. McCampbell agreed to write the foreword to this book, head of the Department of Geology at the University of Southeastern Louisiana. And just quoting parts of it, he says, the facts of geology fit, and that the authors have presented a strong case for this view. Now, he didn't say our view doesn't work, their view does, but of course he is an evolutionist. That's the way I would say it. Based on that and updating the information to what we know today, the book Global Flood, written by the son of Henry Morris, is one I would highly recommend if you want to know more about the subject. It's extremely well done and very readable. One of the questions that comes to mind when we speak of the geologic column, the evidence of the sedimentary rock that you see when you see the road cuts, when you go to Grand Canyon, how do you get the sedimentary record? Well, if it's done by a flood, the question comes up, where does the water come from? You had to have a lot of extra water. And we've got a lot of extra water. I think it's in the ocean now. But in terms of having enough, consider the statement by Jacques Cousteau, who certainly knew a lot about oceans. He says, were all the crust to be leveled out, evened out, no land would show above the surface of the sea, the earth would be covered by a uniform sheet of water more than 10,000 feet deep. So you've got enough to cover the earth by 2 miles of water right now. Okay, where did the water go? Well, I think we have an indication of that from Psalm 104. Not that we're using in this presentation proof from Scripture, but here's the model that we then investigate to see if it fits. He says, you covered it with the deep, as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. Now we know what was going on there. Water above the mountains, the flood. At your rebuke they fled. The sound of your thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose up and the valleys, or literally basins, sank down. Now we can crudely illustrate it this way. I think there were waters above the firmament. Genesis 1, 6, and 7 would define that then as part of the model. Waters above the firmament. Maybe 1 mile high mountains, 1 mile deep oceans before the flood. But then after the flood, when the waters were precipitated and came down 40 days and 40 nights, the mountains rose, the valleys or basins sank down, so that we have what we have now, which is about 3 mile deep oceans on average. So you got an extra 2 miles covering 70% of the Earth's surface. Now that's a lot of extra room, isn't it? That's where the water went. And it works perfectly. Enough to cover the mountains, when we got 1 mile high mountains prior to the flood. Now then, mountains rose. We've got higher mountains. We've got deeper oceans. And that tells us where it came from and where it went, and it works perfectly. But then we're asked, how do you get the segregated animals that form Cambrian rocks and Ordovician rocks and Devonian rocks that allow the geologists to do the work of geology? Well, I think it preserves exactly what we see in various ecological zones today. Things that live at the bottom of the ocean are not like those that live up on the plains or in the forests, and they're segregated by ecology. And a worldwide flood would bury the organisms where they lived, and so you would have animals that lived at the bottom of the ocean together and animals that lived in the plains buried together. Not all at the same spot as we see illustrated here. It's pieced together. But generally speaking, you start with the animals that lived at the bottom of the ocean. They're not simple animals. The trilobites, which are the most common critter there, have better eyes than we do. Extremely complex, corrected for chromatic aberration, very complex organism with differentiated head and tail and thorax right from the start. But they are the animals that lived at the bottom of the ocean, segregated by ecology. So that's what we would expect to see. Groups buried separately, not because they're millions of years apart, but because they lived in different places and were grouped together by habitats. So we find Cambrian rocks, animals that lived at the bottom of the ocean, complex animals. Then above that, those that would live higher. And so we've got a very rough general order with lots of contradictions, as we'll see, that would not happen if they're segregated by millions of years, but would if they were segregated as ecologies. This is an arranged, skewed, conceptual correlation that is useless as proof. Circular logic doesn't prove anything, but it is useful sometimes as a model. With the concept of models, you begin with the idea to be proved. You start out with the conclusion, and then you look at the world around you to see if it fits, which is how you would scientifically test this concept. Stephen Stanley, one of the more famous paleontologists, Johns Hopkins University, spoke of topsy-turvy fossils, things supposed to be down here that are found up there in the geologic column. He said this would disprove evolution. Any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory. And so if you got what's supposed to be down at the bottom, up at the top, that's not the way they would predict, and so that's a problem. Well, not so much, we're told, because we find it all the time. That's really not an unusual situation. Niles Eldridge of the American Museum of Natural History, curator there, says in his book, Living Fossils, which is about hundreds of examples of those things that were fossils living down toward the bottom that are still alive today. There seems to have been almost no change in any part we can compare. We've not completely solved the riddle of living fossils. Evidently, there's just so many contradictions, they say, well, we're not going to worry about that part. They worry about the other part, as we'll see. But as an example, he gives the horseshoe crab in the fossil record. First members of this group appeared some 424 million years ago in the Silurian. That's right down toward the bottom. And they look just like what you see today. As he continues to say, they look like modern forms. The last fossils became extinct about 50 million years ago. Started 424 now. And of course, I don't buy the ages, but let's just play the game their way and see how it comes out. They haven't changed. Today, 424 million years. The point is, here is that which is at the bottom that we find at the top, and that's an excellent illustration of it. It's amazing that he would express it that way. Fossils became extinct. No, the critter did, but he's saying the last fossils were extinct pretty close to the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs, but they're still alive. Why extinct? Well, you don't find them above this level in the column, which they've assigned ages to, but they're alive. Well, but you see their problem. The coelacanth probably is one of the more famous living fossils, described here by Keith Thompson, president of the Academy of Natural Sciences. A rather strange-looking fish. They thought it was in the evolutionary process because he had great big lobes, like feet, maybe. Fish thought to be extinct for 70 million years, about the time of the dinosaurs. The fish was a coelacanth animal that thrived concurrently with the dinosaurs. And then he continues, they look quite like, what? Like modern forms. And we have no fossil coelacanths yet. The oldest fossils are right back at the time the dinosaurs went extinct, we're told. You see them up to here, and then they stop, and you go on up, and they're still alive. We've caught over 1,000 of them since 1940 when they were first found. But no fossils since the time of the dinosaurs. Well, that falsifies the extinction idea. These are topsy fossils, we'll call them, that say, yeah, it looks like it's extinct if you're interpreting this in terms of eras, but they're still alive. I think that falsifies the concept, though you don't typically hear that. But the real evidence, in their view, is that which is supposed to be at the top that's found down, the turvy fossils, if you please. There's no way, if they haven't evolved yet, that you could find them down at the bottom. Obviously, there's no logical way around that. Richard Dawkins describes the problem this way. We should be very surprised, for example, to find humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. That would be the turvy fossil. Our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. And I think he's right, and I think we have. He says in Newsweek, evolution could be so easily disproved if just a single fossil turned up in the wrong date order. Just take one. Well, we've got more than that. What would be evidence against evolution, and very strong evidence of that, would be the discovery of even a single fossil in the wrong geologic stratum. Well, just taking it exactly as he described it, here are human fossils that we found at LaSalle, Utah, not far from Moab. In the layer is supposed to be 140 million years old. Same layer where we find dinosaurs. Dinosaur National Monument has the same Dakota sandstone that's found there at near Moab. And these are perfectly modern human skeletons. We found a number of those skeletons there. Well, at this point, we find a new set of objections. Must have been an intrusional burial. That is, they fell down a crack, and that's how they got down there where they weren't supposed to be. You don't see any cracks, no broken bones. Well, maybe it was a mining cave-in, and they were mining, and the cave collapsed on them. Well, again, no broken bones. Of the 12 skeletons that we have found there, 4 of them are female, and 1 of them is an infant. Infants, females, no broken bones, no tools, all just washed into place. That doesn't sound like a mine cave-in to me. And of course, that's just completely ad hoc without any evidence of it at all. It's a way to avoid the implications. We went back to this spot to try to investigate. It's an open copper mine. And actually, when it began back in the 20s, the road was not there. And where you see the road, it's all been excavated out. And you see the backhoe digging 50 feet down from the surface in this Dakota sandstone, and that's where the skeletons were found. This one articulated, that is, together as in life. And you see the hip over here on the right, the knees up at the top. These are just washed into place, as most of the bones are. They may look like they belong together, but are not. And here is one that we just took out of the rock, washed it off with the canteen. It's a bright green, replaced with malachite, some of them completely replaced. We've got one of the jaws that's jewelry grade turquoise. That's a human jaw. So it's not a recent burial, obviously. Takes probably 1,000 years for that to happen. And there's no collagen, likewise about 1,000 years for that to dissipate normally. And I think we can justify that statement, but we don't have time tonight. This is the perfect turvy fossil. Exactly what Dawkins said would utterly destroy evolution. You find human fossils back here before they're supposed to have evolved, would disprove evolution. And in the same article, he continues, actually this is in Blind Watchmaker, having talked about out of order fossils and the implications, he says, ironically, it's also the reason why creationists are so keen on the fake human footprints, which were carved during the Depression to fool tourists in the dinosaur beds of Texas. Well, now, he's never been to Texas. He sits behind his desk, and he's sure he knows all about it, that they were carved. And why would you worry about footprints when you got bones? Well, bones can be eroded and redeposited. It's conceivable that you could have an intrusional burial, but you can't do that with footprints, can you? You erode them, they're gone. And so it's really better evidence. They cannot be intrusionally buried. Not that the bones are not good evidence. You just imagine that they don't belong there is not good science. But footprints have to be where you find them. Dinosaur Valley State Park in Texas, near Glen Rose, about 60 miles south and a little west of Dallas, is a great place to take a vacation and see lots of dinosaur tracks. The Paluxy River has eroded down to a layer that's full of dinosaur tracks. They were found back in the 40s, early 40s, and made famous. Both the three-toed and the sauropod, the big round elephant-like tracks. You also have some that look like this, which is pretty unusual. They're raised three-dimensionally. Well, now, tracks are supposed to sink down, right? And I think that was the case initially. But then that material that filled in the track filled them in and became rock and was harder than the matrix around it, so that with subsequent erosion, the raised part was left as the matrix eroded away. And that's important for some reasons that we'll look at in a moment. This is raised infill that was originally depression filled in. As we're looking around in the area, one of the things that really got our attention was this one from the same area. Anybody have any idea what that might look like? I think that's pretty obvious. We found others that looked like this. Well, that has to be carved. That's just too good to be true. And Dawkins says, yeah, that has to be carved. And so that was tested. We decided to follow two of the tracks that were coming out of the riverbank, Stan Taylor did, back in the early 70s, and followed them back up under the riverbank. We've got about 6 feet of alternating clay, limestone. And if that trail continued back up under the riverbank, what would that say about the idea they were carved? That'd pretty well rip it, wouldn't it? That wouldn't work. And there they go, continuing back up under the riverbank for 12 that he uncovered. And then we've uncovered 2 more. Some of them very detailed. You can see the mud push up around it, which would certainly argue against the idea that it's erosion. The one that really persuaded me, and I was trying to play the devil's advocate here. How do you explain this? Is this one, which showed both human and dinosaur track on top of each other. Here is the dinosaur track. They turned out to be about 25 inches rather consistently, but stepping within it, this time, sometimes beside and across, head off, but here within it is a track with all 5 toes and instep and heel, and we really need more dark to see that, but that's, I wonder if we could have a little, is there a way to douse the lights a little bit more there for that to show up, maybe just for this section. Seeing that, I think is significant. This is the dinosaur track. It's still not showing up, maybe a little better. This is what happened to it, or we can turn the lights back up. Thank you. Within days. I made a presentation at a science meeting in Tennessee. The fellow got Humanist of the Year for explaining these away as just strange dinosaur tracks. Got all excited about it, got on a plane the next day, flew to Dallas, and then was in the river with a large iron pole and just beat the daylights out of it. Of course, we have good stereo photographs and casts and excellent documentation before he did that, but he documented the fact that it was bothering him big time. On up the trail, you see another one with 3 toes ahead of the human track that stepped in it. Looking at a side view of that track, we can see that very obvious human shape and the 3 toes that are infilled, slightly raised in some places, but basically flush with the human track in it. Now, this one is a right. Directly ahead of it is a left, and it's left, right for 14 now. Looking at a side view of this one, we can see it's not on top of, but beside a dinosaur track. And this is the entire sequence here with a highlighted trail of dinosaur tracks going across at about a 30-degree angle. We did an analysis of it, and each of these 14 have at least a general human shape. They're pretty consistent in length. 7 of them have individual toes. With Mary Leakey's tracks in Africa, none of them have individual, well, you can see the great toe on some of them, but none of the individual toes. You can distinguish right from left in 12 of the 14. 2 of them are just general oblong shapes. And when this fellow who got Humanist of the Year, who tore up the track, speaks on the subject, guess which 2 he shows? The 2 that are just the general oblong shape. But all of them are consistent, that is, the rights where the rights ought to be, the lefts where the lefts, none completely inconsistent. And we did do an experiment at Kansas State University with a blind test, putting life-size pictures of each of the 14 tracks on the table and having the psych students come in and ask them, what is this? 97% said, well, those are human tracks. Then we got rough on them. Tell me right from left. And 87% got that correct, but of course 2 of them are indistinct, so that's exactly what we had predicted. And this is the way you do science. Dawkins sits behind his desk in Oxford and says, no, it has to be carved, and won't come look. But I think it's excellent evidence. We were told, well, you need more evidence, and we did. But I was making a presentation up in Tennessee shortly after this at the University of Tennessee, about 50 grad students and head of the department there. And when we finished, the grad students turned around and looked at the professor. What are you going to say about this? You've got human tracks and dinosaur tracks. They're supposed to be 100 billion years apart, stepping in each other's footprints. And the professor said, and I'm quoting exactly what he said, "We don't know that there weren't dinosaurs back there with human feet." I thought, well, I guess that's right. We don't know that. We also don't know that there weren't humans back there with dinosaur feet, but I think that'd be a pretty strange idea. I said, these things that look like dinosaur feet, you think these are dinosaur tracks? Yeah. Well, these things that look like human feet, wouldn't the most reasonable explanation be they're human? No, he wouldn't agree with that. I said, well, if they were human feet, would they look any different? And he got up and left. That was the end of the conversation. So we're having fun, just presenting the evidence. Chuck Finsley, who was curator of the Dallas Museum of Natural History for 30 years, came down. He wanted to exhibit one of the dinosaurs that we had exhibited, and we made him come look at the footprints. And he got upset and left, and then came back because he really, really wanted that dinosaur that we had. And he got mad again, and then third time he said, all right, Dr. Patton, I've come up with an idea, an answer to your problem. How do we explain these human-looking tracks together with the dinosaur-looking tracks? He says, I think I know how to explain that. He says, I think they were made by aliens. And I said, well, now, Chuck, if they made by aliens, I guess that would indicate they came from a galaxy far, far away and be more intelligent than we are. What are they doing running around barefooted? And he got mad again. But these are perfect turby fossils. They can't be intrusionally buried because they're excavated from under the overburden and not carved. They're in a right, left pattern for 14. And so they're not erosion, they're not carved, not intrusional. Well, their answer is they got dinosaurs with human feet or you've got aliens. And that's the best they can do. And we're having fun presenting this on college campuses across the country. I just say, well, maybe if you're going to dream up an answer, you might dream up an alien dinosaur with human feet just as well. Okay? But we ought to be scientists and go with what we see. And maybe it's what it looks like. What a unique idea as a scientist. Well, they suggested we needed more evidence. And so in 2000, there was a drought, 2000, 2001. We were able to continue the excavation for over 500 feet, following the dinosaur trail that crossed that human-looking trail. And the arrow here points around the corner to a little fellow that you can almost see up there who's pointing around. But you got a lot of dinosaur tracks, over 500 consecutive feet, and some of them are absolutely spectacular. Some of the most beautiful tracks and the longest consecutive trail on the North American continent. We know what dinosaur tracks look like, but what is crossing that trail at a 30-degree angle is very different, as you can see. But then again, they said, well, you need more evidence, which is what you say when you don't know what to say. But up ahead of the fellow standing at the end of the trail there's another platform that's several layers above that print platform, which we decided to excavate. And so we took that layer down to the print layer and found more dinosaur tracks. There's about 100 dinosaur tracks on the platform. There's 134 on the previous one. But going right through the middle of it is a series of human-looking tracks, here 15 in a right-left pattern. Looking at a close-up there toward the middle, I believe you can see, maybe the highlighting there doesn't show up that much, does it? But they're duck-shaped dinosaur prints there. But on the right one, something stepped into it that's very human-like. In fact, you can count the joints in the knuckles with a very strong mud push-up around it. Looking at a close-up of that one on the right, and both of the dinosaur tracks are slightly raised. The human is depressed, but you can see the individual toes and the very obvious human shape with the dinosaur track up ahead, the duck shape. But here's something that stepped into it, as we found in the previous trail. Now, they didn't say you need more evidence after that. They just sort of quit talking about it. This one is called the McFall Trail, 15 in a right-left pattern, with my beloved standing at the end of this trail. With that confidence, we went back to this track, which was really the one that got the initial interest going, the Burdick track found by Clifford Burdick back in the 40s. Weren't exactly sure where it came from, but we knew generally, and we were able to identify the precise spot from some of the identifying factors in the rock. Is it possible that this is carved? It sure looks detailed and really looks good. Well, sometimes in tracks you can find structures down under the pressure points that indicate pressure was there, which would tell us whether or not it was carved. Sectioning at the heel, you see the cross section here. I believe you're able to see the disturbed material directly under it, and that would indicate clearly that this is a real track. We presented this at a science meeting in Dallas, where they said, well, obviously that's a real track, but it must be a track, a dinosaur track somebody carved toes on. Again, completely ad hoc, no evidence for that, but I'm glad they did, because we continued to investigate and sectioned across the toes, which is a reach, because sometimes we don't find structures even under the heel of the dinosaur. But if you've got fine-grained limestone, often you can. And so here we sectioned, and this is the cross section at the toes. You can actually see structures under each of those toes, but particularly at the great toe, we can see the following contours that would not be there if it were carved. It would cut across the contours rather than follow as contours. So this one is verified both at heel and toe, and they quit talking about that again. Just a few years later, the real dramatic find was made. This was in the year 2000, though at that point, the fellow who found this particular section that was broken off already, it was caked with mud, and he could tell it was the dinosaur track, and he took it home. And it stayed 2 years under his bed till he finally got out and cleaned it up and said, wow, look what's in the front of the toes here. Well, the evolutionists say, of course, that's carved. That has to be carved, and you're somewhat intimidated by that, because it looks almost too good to be true. But we used a spiral CAT scan to test, rather than physically sawing it, because this is a real prize. And here we see the cross-section. There were some 300 virtual cross-sections, but this one was at a clearly defined spot right across the toes, the dinosaur toe and the human toe. And corresponding to that, in the cross-section, you see the human toe and the dinosaur toe. But looking closely at that human toe, you can't really see it because it's washed out. But there are following contours that are very obvious there. If you want to look at my computer afterwards, I'd be glad to show that to you. So that this one is verified as not carved by empirical evidence. We traveled to another spot that I think is very interesting, Natural Bridges National Monument near Blanding, Utah, the Four Corners area, where Anasazi Indians lived about 1,000 years ago, disappeared about 1,200 years ago. And under the arches, they would make drawings, petroglyphs. And right here where that little blue arrow is a number of drawings, and I've climbed up there beside it. And I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this. Maybe, okay, we do the highlighting and you can see they were drawing pictures of dinosaurs 1,000 years ago in the canyon. And how do you explain that? They had to be seeing the dinosaur. And the red desert varnish makes it very difficult to photograph. And when you scratch through it, it just really lights up, so it's very obvious. This was a 1,000-year-old picture of a dinosaur. They're supposed to have been gone 65 million years at least, and we've known about them maybe 100. That presents a significant problem. And we have at least 4 other clear dinosaur petroglyphs. We travel down to Peru. Excuse me. Dr. Javier Cabrera passed away in 2002, but he was one of the great scientists in Peru. He performed the first heart transplant. He was head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima for 20 years, and then retired to be cultural anthropologist in Inca, famous for a number of things in the area. But he was excavating the tombs. His father actually began collecting burial stones from those tombs in the late 30s, early 40s, and he's continued. He has a collection of about 11,000 burial stones from the Inca tombs. And here we were able to get into some of the tombs and do some of the excavating. Is one of those burial stones there next to the mummy. But when you look at these burial stones, about 1/3 of them have dinosaurs on them. Now, this is larger than normal. This is almost 3 feet tall, but most of them are smaller. But you've got 11,000 and about 1/3 of them of dinosaurs. Another 1/3 are some of the most disgusting pornography you've ever seen, or have never seen, hopefully. Not done by young Earth creationists. Okay, thank you. The dinosaur here has the dermal frills on the back, which we didn't know about till 1992 when they were first published in Geology. Mr. Sinclair didn't know that there were dermal frills on his dinosaur, but this one did, and we've learned that since. They got it right from 2,000 years ago down in Peru. Here's some of the collection, some of them very large, as you can see, with rather ornate and artistic drawings. Can you see the dinosaur in the upper right with the foot in the mouth of the fellow upside down over here? Shades of Jurassic Park. Another one on a triceratops, pretty obvious there. Different styles, different types of stone, different artists, but over 11,000 of these stones. Some of them continue to be excavated, even though Cabrera has died. And some have said, well, here's this famous scientist, and he just decided to carve 11,000 burial stones on his own. Obviously, no evidence for that, but they continue to be excavated now that he's passed away. This is one I have in my museum, and I have, I think, 4 of these stones there. And it, you really can't see that. Okay, I'm sorry. But that's a picture of a dinosaur. You want to confirm that, you have to come look at the screen. With these burial stones in the tombs with the mummies were the burial cloths, and they also reflect the dinosaur motif, as you can see here. Several different styles, but you've got the burial cloths and the stones. You also see that on the pottery in the tombs. These are from the National Museum in Lima. And I think we can tell what that looks like. It says 2,500 years old in the sign under this in the museum there in Lima. Up in the northern part of Peru, there are some gold artifacts, death masks here illustrated, but look on either side of the face. You see the dermal frills again on the back, the tail going over the back, and a huge teeth of a dinosaur. These people had to be seeing dinosaurs, and a wide variety of them. Down in Peru, some 2,000 years ago. Now, all over the world we're finding this. We traveled to Mexico in the central highlands near Acambaro, and we've made a number of trips down there, especially with Dr. Swift, who's an archaeologist from Portland. And we have found the Geologic collection that has 33,000 artifacts in it from the Chipiquaro culture dated at about 4,000 years ago. Over 30,000 figurines, and some of them, about 10% of the 30,000, look like dinosaurs. And we have photographs of each of them from 4,000 years ago. Supposed to have been gone 65 million. We've known what they looked like for 100. What were they doing making figurines 4,000 years ago down in Mexico? Obviously a turvy fossil. And some of the Brontosaurus type were standing up. Now, we didn't know that 20 years ago till Spielberg taught us, and now we all know they stood up. A wide variety of styles and species are represented. This is my wife's favorite, because you don't have to have humans and dinosaurs in the same figure to know that there were humans doing this. But the obvious conclusion is that man and dinosaur lived together, and they have become excited about that and built a museum there, and you can go down to Acambaro, Mexico, and go into the Geologic Museum and see what we've helped put together down there. We traveled to France. My wife doesn't really go to the rural areas of Mexico or some of the other places where we go, but yeah, you go into France, into Paris, yeah, she's ready to volunteer for that duty. Standing here in front of the Louvre, we see one of the carvings from 1509, Sir George fighting the dragon. And he looks an awful lot like a T-Rex, looking at the teeth and the scales from 1509. By the way, you go to Georgia, Russian Georgia, that name came from Sir George slaying the dragon, and they have in the Capitol Freedom Circle and a big 60-foot pedestal with Sir George slaying. Boy, it looks just like a dinosaur. And what do dragons look like? We mentioned that a little bit Sunday. Down in the southern part of France, we find Chateau de Chambord, and my beautiful wife standing out in front of the castle. Over 700 dinosaurs carved on the walls and the ceilings of this castle that was built in the 14th century. Here I'm standing beside one of them and looking at a close-up. You see obviously the scales and the long neck and the claws. And you look on the ceiling, very beautifully and artistically done, over 700 dinosaurs. Supposed to have been a hunting lodge. Makes you wonder what they were hunting, doesn't it? This is one of the ceiling tiles, and this is from the Harvard Museum of Natural History, the dead ringer for a Plateosaurus. This one over the fireplace in Chateau de Chambord. About 20 kilometers from there is Chateau de Bois, which has over, well, I didn't count the whole number, didn't see a total, but you've got dinosaurs all over this one as well, built in the 12th century. And in the throne room, we see this beautiful tapestry from the period, and it shows what looks like a dinosaur. We compare that, for example, with Dracorex hogwartia. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you know about Hogwarts. And, this was the dragon of or at least it was named for it, but Bob Bacher found this, and you compare that skull with what's on the tapestry, and wow, that's a dead ringer. So in France, as well as numbers of other places in Europe that we don't have time to deal with, you see that the dinosaurs hadn't been gone that long. We go to Cambodia. No, my wife didn't volunteer to go there either, back in the jungles. Up near Siem Reap are some of the most spectacular temples, maybe the largest, most beautiful ever built by man. Jayavarman VII is credited with building a good many of them. This is a picture of him. He's almost reverenced like Buddha. I took this picture in Phnom Penh there in the museum. But the Khmer Empire was awesome and built great temples, and he died in 1181. This Tapram is a temple that was found in the jungle that was left unrestored. That was dedicated in 1186. And almost every square inch of it is covered with stone carvings of all types. And right here in the corner where the arrow is pointing, you see this column, and on it you can see parrots and monkeys and water buffalo and Hindu figures. And can you tell what that looks like if we look a little closer? Yes. There's a stegosaurus. You show that to sixth graders and every one of them will wave it. Yeah, that's a stegosaurus. Dedicated in 1186, and we've known what they looked like for about 100 years. This is just obvious indication of proof of the co-occurrence of humans and dinosaurs, which say this column doesn't represent, it's contradicted, it's falsified. Notice the significance from some of the leading evolutionists. Louis Jacobs, the time this statement was made, was president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology at SMU in Dallas. He said, you find humans and dinosaurs together, evolution would be vanquished. Stephen Stanley, that we quoted earlier from Johns Hopkins, says it would disprove evolution. Jerry Cohn, the vicious anti-creationist from University of Chicago, said it would be one of the ugly facts that could kill Darwinism. And I find myself agreeing with them. I think they understand it. And our friend Richard Dawkins, friend in quotes, says evolution would be utterly destroyed. Evolution would be disproved. It would blow the theory of evolution out of the water, he said in Newsweek. I think he's right. When we look at the geologic column, remember this is not what you find when you dig down in the earth, but it's a model that we use to test against the real world. And when we compare it with the real world, we find contradiction after contradiction after contradiction here and around the world, so that model needs to be burned up. That doesn't work. It's falsified. And I think this is profound evidence. NOVA sent a film crew down to Glen Rose to photograph some of the footprints that we were excavating. The reporters there, the photographers got very excited. They thought they had earth-shaking evidence and went back and they made a video which the editors killed, replaced it with a brief film entitled Darwin and the Dinosaurs. And in it said that there's nothing at Glen Rose that look anything like human footprints. Now, you just have to decide that for yourself. I think that's very obviously untrue, but that's the way they began. But then tell us why. Dinosaur footprints side by side with humans, finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct, and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. So they don't exist. They deny it. They will not acknowledge that. You'll have to decide for yourself whether that evidence sustains the conclusion. If it does, then certainly it fits with the concept all created in 6 days. It fits the facts. All right, let's see if some of you have some questions. I think I finished just seconds early.
Is the human footprints, is that something that we could go see today, or has that been covered up, or how is that controlled? Or?
They're casts and, of course, stereo photographs that are available at the museum there. It's very difficult. We had to pump the water out and sandbag. Plus, the park has bought all the property in the area that they could, and they're doing their best to keep us out. Now, at the right time of the year, late fall, just before the hurricane season comes, when it's driest, you can come from up, but you have to have special permission from a landowner that is kind of persnickety, but that can be arranged. And yes, they can be seen still today, but it's not easy. If you ask at the park, they will tell you there are no human footprint, nothing that looks anything like a human footprint.
How important do you think it is, and sometimes it seems like arguments about the age of the earth.
I didn't hear the first part, I'm sorry.
How important do you think it is to win the arguments instead of just maybe saying, however it happened, but I still believe in God and Jesus and everything else?
Well, if the Earth's young, then evolution's dead. So it's important from that standpoint. It's critical for them to have that in order to maintain their position. I think the evidence is overwhelming, and if you get somebody to look objectively at it, it's pretty easy to show. More and more are accepting that, and there are literally thousands of very competent scientists who have been convinced that the evidence shows the Earth's young. We spent our time last night talking about the reasons why they say it's old and showing that that's not really good, convincing evidence. We ran very quickly over evidences that were proposed by the evolutionist, his evidences that he acknowledged indicates young, but there are a lot more than that. Maybe the most exciting that's happened just recently is the soft tissue in the dinosaur bones that we know can't last millions of years, and they acknowledge can't last, and yet we've got over 100 examples. There are about 150 articles that's been published in the secular literature are finding this soft tissue. I just recently traveled up to New York to meet with Dr. Damanian, who was the inventor of MRI. He was a very devout young Earth creationist, by the way. Should have gotten the Nobel Prize. The only reason he didn't, he was a creationist, and we can document that. But he's invented a new type of MRI that where you stand up, you don't go through the tunnel, and it's much more sensitive. And I took several of the big dinosaur bones that we'd gotten, and yep, we found soft tissue. He can distinguish between spleen and heart, and it's a big step forward. How do they account it? They say it's billions of years old. Well, let's use carbon-14. It says thousands, not billions. Bring it on. I think it's our friend now. But that is a devastating conclusion. That the ball game's over. So if you have evidence that is detrimental, yeah, they kind of maybe will halfway admit. But if you're just cutting their throat, which this one does, young Earth, they're going to fight. And you expect that, and let's just not be intimidated by the intense opposition. Let's just stand with the facts.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one would be for the Paluxy footprints, for the ones that are just general profiles. I've heard the argument that that's just dinosaur heel prints and the toes are filled in. And
Well,
so,
is that what it looked like to you?
no, I mean, aside from the ones with the toe prints, I mean,
Yeah, that's what they say.
yeah. So, and the second one would be the Ica
I
stones.
can tell you a quick story there. I don't. Anybody here know Steve Rudd? Okay, it means more if you know. Steve is kind of a comical fellow anyway. But I was doing a seminar up where he is in Canada, and he had gotten me on a talk radio show with supposedly the #1 talk radio show in Canada. It goes all over the country. The fellow had an incredible voice. Anyway, we came up there, and of course he's a humanist, an atheist, and makes it very clear. But we had a 30-minute program. Well, he had heard about this and done his homework, and he called the fellow who is probably the leading opponent that we have down in Glen Rose, and he had talked to him. And when we got there, he had him on the phone, and he was going to put us together. This was kind of interview by ambush. But I had a few minutes to talk to him before, and I showed him the pictures, and he said, "What in the world is he going to say about that? That's human footprints." I said, "He'll deny it. He'll just say it's not so." "How can you do that?" I'm looking. Well, let's just see how it goes. And so we started the program, and he was interviewing him and asking him. He said, "I've seen some of these footprints. They look pretty real." "Oh, no, they're not really. They don't look like human footprints. They're just filled in. They're not true." He said, "What do you mean? I can play Little Piggy Goes to Market on these toes. How do you deny that?" So we turned the atheist around right there on the air, which was,
Just one more.
I thought, intriguing.
All right, the second question was with the Ica stones. I've heard that
With the what?
with the Ica stones, I heard that some of those were forged. How would you answer that and prove the provenance?
There's 11,000 of them.
Yeah, yeah,
Why? Who's going to?
yeah.
They say Dr. Cabrera did it. Well, you know, he was retired. He's a surgeon, and he's carving stones. What's the evidence for that? I met one of the fellows that they said did it, and he has done a lot of the excavating. He brought a lot of the stones to Dr. Cabrera. And there was an instance that they did record on film where he is recorded saying he carved some of the stones. And he said not all of them, but I did. And the reason was that he had sold some, and they had documented he had, to Dr. Cabrera. Well, now, if you're selling antiquities in Peru, that's a 20-year sentence. And the average life expectancy in a Peruvian prison is 3 years. So he didn't want to go to prison. And so with the police standing there, they filmed him saying that. But even in the process, he said, "No, I carved some," which I don't believe at all. Wouldn't really matter. There's thousands of them. Yes.
Yeah, I was a little confused about the Chateau de Chambord
Yes.
slide. So I just looked on Wikipedia. It was built in the 1500s. So what was the implication of bringing that slide up? Are you saying dinosaurs aren't as old as we think they are, that they were contemporaneous with the 1500s, or what?
They had to see them. They had beautiful detailed pictures. How do you do that if you don't? Dinosaurs weren't, and when we first found them 100 years ago, you look at the restorations, they're comical. I mean, it's funny looking to see the way they tried to restore them. And that was in the 1800s. Well, this was done in the 1500s. Early 1500s, 14, and then of course at Chateau de Bois in the 1300s. And they're beautiful. They had to be seeing them. You can't draw a picture of something that you've never seen before. I think that's necessary. And of course, the same implication in Cambodia of the perfect Stegosaurus from 1,000 years ago. It's just so perfect. I mean, you show that to any kid anywhere, he'll tell you exactly what kind of dinosaur it is. And that just says the idea they're 65 million years old is not going to work. We see it from the North American Indians, and we see it in Peru, and we see it in Mexico, and implied from the footprints. There's lots more evidence as well, but it's a good indication. Yeah, they had to be seeing them. I don't think there's any reasonable explanation. All right, we thank you very much for your attention and appreciate the good questions. Be glad to talk to you afterwards. Tomorrow night we're talking about the fossil record. If there is documentary evidence of evolution, that has to be where it's at, in the fossils. And sometimes I find Christians are intimidated. Fossils mean evolution. And I'll just tell you plainly, that ain't so. It's the opposite. This is the strongest evidence, documentary evidence perhaps, that we have. And if I'm going to debate the subject on a college campus, that's what I want to debate and what we have debated, the fossil record. Come look at the evidence with us tomorrow night. Thank you very much.